I want to do a really brief introduction before we get into the real content of today. My name is Jodie Sangster and I'm the CEO of ADMA, and I'm really delighted that we're partnering with the C3 today to bring you Rayid Ghani, all the way from Chicago, who will talk to us about the Advanced American campaign. We're here to talk about data, and I'm delighted that suddenly, we were talking about it this morning, that data has become a subject that people who have started to want to talk about. Having been in marketing, direct marketing, data-driven marketing for 15 years now, it's always been seen as a kind of slightly sort of niche form of marketing. And now, through the kind of use of data, we're seeing it underpinning the future of marketing and advertising. So when we're talking about data, we're really looking at the power that it has in terms of engaging customers, delivering insights, most importantly, that's close, delivering business outcomes. But I kind of want to put it a little bit in context because we talk a lot about data, particularly in the marketing context. And there are probably a couple of ways that data is talked about that aren't quite correct. We have always talked about data in terms of marketing, but really these days data is driving business decisions, and I think that's the big change that we've probably seen in the last 2 years. Whereas previously it's always been a marketing discussion that companies want to use it to better engage with their customers, it is now used across the full spectrum of the business to better inform efficiencies and outcomes. So that is a big change that we've seen. The other area, and I know I've been banned from saying it, but I'm going to say it once and that's it, is the term big data. And I do think that big data does play its role. Obviously, what we're talking about with regard to big data and the analytics that go with it are nothing new, it's just on a bigger scale. But I do think that big data has played its role, because the term big data now means that the discussion is up at sea level. It's up at sea level, and suddenly we've got the sea level taking notice, saying this is something that we need to know about, this is something that we need to invest in. And so it's served its purpose. Like the term or don't like the term, it's served its purpose, it's serving its purpose, and call it what you will, a fad. It is important that we do have buy-in from that senior level to make sure that we can bring some of these data practices into our businesses. The third thing is that data is both our biggest opportunity and our biggest challenge. And I see that with so many of ADMA members, that we know we've got to be using data, we know we know the value of data, but where do we start with it? And that is going to be a continuing challenge for business. We've seen a number of research reports that have come out with CMOs saying this really is our number one priority and our number one concern, and we don't know where to start. And it's really that discussions like this today are so important, where we can get together and share experiences, etc., so that we can kind of be on the journey to true data-driven marketing together. So I think one thing that we are all agreed on is that the power of data is undeniable. And really, I think the Obama campaign and what we're going to hear about today is just testament to that. I think it was called the most data-driven campaign in history, and I'm sure we're going to learn an awful lot today about some of the practices that were put in place to get such a successful outcome. So I'm really looking forward to today's session. This is the first time that I've heard Rayid speaking, so I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm also delighted that we are partnering with C3 Business Solutions. C3 is an award-winning information management, analytics and business intelligence company, and they work with some of Australia's largest both public and private sector organisations, enabling them to both monitor and manage business performance and outcomes against strategic goals. Clients of C3 define them by their ability to deliver outcomes through business stakeholder engagement and change management capabilities. So I'm really pleased that we are partnering together. In the room, you might put your hand up, we have the managing partners of C3, so Conrad Bates, over there, Cameron Wall, who's going to be doing the interview today with Rayid, Blair Del Zoppo, yes, and Janica told me I'm allowed just to say his first name because the surname is quite hard to pronounce. Janica over there. So I'm going to pass over to Cameron now, who will be interviewing our very special guest, Rayid Ghani, and talking about the value of analytics for achieving business outcomes. So over to you.
I won't be doing too much of the talking today. I think we all came here to listen to Rayid speak. Just by way of background, and Jodie hinted on it, but Rayid was the chief scientist in the Obama 2012 election. Pretty tough job. It was a binary outcome. He either was wildly successful or the opposite. We all know how he ended up, and we'd like to hear about it. But before I start, Rayid and I got along right from the outset, purely based on one item, and that is Rayid doesn't like the use of jargon, and neither do I. Having said that, I'd like to give you...
here, I mean, nobody will claim that they do, right?
I would like to read out some of Rayid's specialties. Machine learning, data mining, text mining, web mining, neuro-linguistic programming, information retrieval, information extraction, web and enterprise search, active learning, semi-supervised learning, predictive analytics, So for a man who doesn't like jargon, there's certainly quite a few items on his CV that reads pretty well. But I wanted to take you guys through the story of the Obama 2012 campaign, but I also wanted to relate it to your day-to-day work. And I think the way to do that, I want to ask Rayid some questions around the background of that campaign, the scale of that campaign, talk about the solution, what they actually did to solve the problem, what was different, and then maybe how we can apply that to your situation. But just to start, Rayid, in terms of background of how did you get involved? What was the objective that was given to you? Can you let us know the background?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Most people who sort of meet me now think of me as somebody who's a political data person, and it's funny because I think of myself as a computer scientist, because that's kind of who I am. Politics was sort of a detour that I took, mostly because I spent a lot of time looking at data and applying it in these techniques to different areas. And so I've done a lot of work in retail, in healthcare, and intelligence, and financial services, and I spent a long time doing that. Politics was just 2 years. But when I was working, so I spent 10 years working at Accenture Research Lab, which you all probably know Accenture probably. They had a research lab where we were really trying to take, we had a group that was focused on looking at these types of technologies and building out the next generation of them for different businesses. And it was great. I could do whatever I wanted. And I had a great team. And eventually I got tired of doing something that didn't really change anything for the average person. Sure, it helped people do slightly better, targeting of some sort and sell more things, but that wasn't what I cared about. I was motivated by the technical challenges and not by the actual social impact. So I started thinking about what trying to bridge the gap of things that I cared about and things that I was good at. And before I sort of picked a random time to leave Accenture, I told them I'm leaving in 3 months. I have no idea what I'm going to do next, but I'll figure it out. And between that time and when I left, the Obama campaign was setting up a few blocks from where I was. And they heard that I was thinking about leaving, talked to me about building a team that was really going to be very data-driven. And we just talked about sort of, it was a very top-down mandate of we are going to be a very data-driven campaign. Now, that doesn't mean it's good or bad. Everybody wants to run a data-driven anything, right? Nobody's going to claim, I will run a gut-based company. But the good thing was they actually followed through on that. We got the budget to hire a team. We had about 50 analytics people in our team. We had about the same amount of 50 engineers building, that wasn't just for analytics, but so overall, we had about 100 and something people doing technology and data and analytics for an organization that was a few hundred people big, large. So
in terms of the timeline, how far prior to when the election was coming up, how far out did it start?
So we started about a year and a half before the election, which is nothing, for all of you and for me. But for the campaign, people who live in the political world, a year and a half is eternity, because they've never had that much time. They usually live week to week, month to month. They don't have the time to build an infrastructure. they just put something together, and so a year and a half for them was ridiculously long. A year and a half for me was, nothing happens in a year and a half. Right? You spend 5 years on a data warehousing project where you just put data together, not do anything with it, and then that's obsolete, so you build another one. And so what our goal was to sort of, one, build a team from zero to what we got to, build an infrastructure from, it wasn't zero, but it was, it's like scale of 1 to 10, it was probably at 2, and we need to get it to at least 5 or 6. And it wasn't just build it and then use it, it was building and using it at the same time. And it had to not only, so in terms of scale, eventually we ended up having about several million volunteers, a couple of million volunteers making phone calls and knocking on doors, about 120 million contacts, right? So we had to, in a way, enable these contacts. Where should they go? Who should they talk to? We had a mailing list of about between 10 and 20 million that we were sending, email list. We were sending, billions of emails. We sent about 5 billion emails. And that was, again, in the back, had to be targeted. So it was pretty daunting in the beginning.
And was the goal of or the objective of the campaign? Obviously, the objective was to win the election. And do you think that crystal clear objective was one of the differentiators for your success? I mean, was that what gelled the team together? Did everybody had that same direction?
Right. I mean, we had 3 objectives. We needed to get more Facebook fans than our competitor. Just kidding. If you read the media, that's what you would think, that more Facebook fans, it means more votes for some strange reason. I mean, in the US, in Australia even. Yesterday I was talking to a reporter, and they were saying, well, Kevin Rudd has 1.1 million Twitter followers, and that must mean he has a higher chance of winning. Sure, if Twitter followers were all to vote, and I mean, so I think our objectives were, going back to your, having a very clear objective makes it very easy, and we were very lucky because most organizations don't have that single objective. Right? You might have different objectives different times. Sometimes you're looking for revenue, sometimes you're looking for market share, sometimes you're looking for margin, sometimes you're
reducing churn and so on.
Right, so you have 7, 8 different goals and you're trying to kind of juggle them all. In our case, it was a very clear single objective, which made things relatively easy and focused, and if something wasn't achieving that goal, it wasn't worth doing.
Did the team feel that pressure though? I mean, it was there's a definite time frame, a definite objective that you had to hit, and was the feeling in the team, we're either going to be wildly successful or, commiserate at the end of that? I mean, was that pressure? How did that pressure, manifest itself in the team?
Yeah, I mean, it was different. It's not something I was used to. Pressure, yes, but that kind of, as you said, a binary outcome where you either win or lose, and there is no next. You can't just, I'll build something and we can make it better. There's no making it better. It's this, and then it's all over after that. And I mean, I think the good thing about having that pressure was that, the good and bad thing. The good thing about that pressure was that people came together. One of the challenges we had was we had money at some point, but it was still not. So we weren't paying people very much, right? But we were able to get really good people for the amount of money we were paying because there was that sort of external pressure of this is something that they would want to do. The bad thing of having that pressure was that sometimes you struggled with, which every organization does, is what's good enough. Right? When do you stop building this particular product or tool or feature and move on to the next one because this is good enough, and I need to now do these other 20 things that need to be done.
So one of the areas that I wanted to get into was the scale of this. A lot of the people around the table have billion-dollar budgets and don't know what to do with it.
I'll take it.
Which was, like you had a billion-dollar budget, right? Or near enough.
Yeah. I mean, we as a campaign had a $1 billion budget, but half of it was probably spent on TV ads. So if you want to make money, start a TV station in a swing state in the U.S.
So with that sort of budget, though, comes you can do so many things. What was the size of the team that you had?
So our analytics team was about 50 people, and what we had, the way we had set it up was, it was, so the way we structured the campaign was different departments, and each of the departments there was a team focused, a digital team, and it's probably the last time there'll be a digital team, because the digital team did all sorts of things, and then they made videos, they wrote emails, they made posters, they did online ads, they did all sorts of marketing things. So there was a digital team, there was a TV ads and sort of paid media team, there was a finance which was doing fundraising, there was a team which is what's called the field, which is all the canvassing, and then a couple other comms and other teams. And so the way we were structured, that we had a core engineering team that was building an infrastructure. Then we had a core sort of modeling team that was building these predictive models for individuals across all these things. And then there were small teams that were basically interfaces with each of the departments. So they could take the work that we're doing and communicate to each department how basically they were embedded in those departments. And we could tell them how to use it, how to consume the results, how to understand what probability means. When we say somebody's 70% likely to vote for us, it doesn't mean they're mostly going to vote for us. It's either they vote for us or they don't. What does 70% mean? Most Americans, and probably most people in the world, don't understand what 70% really means in that case. So we spent a lot of time communicating what we did, how we did it, and how to consume our results to each of the departments in the campaign, and that was absolutely critical to our analysis being used somewhere, because it wasn't just about building these things. It was about working with them to actually get them to use it.
One of the key differences, I think, between Australia and the US, obviously in the US you don't have to vote, and I think one of the factors that you worked on was people's, I suppose, propensity to vote and whether you could persuade them to vote. Mm-hmm. Can you explain a bit more around that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, Americans in general are lazy, and especially around voting. So average about 50-something% of eligible voting age people in America vote, and so any political campaign there, a major part of the work they do is getting people out to vote. It's not persuading them to like Obama. It's not talking about policies. It's just getting them to vote, because if you get them to vote, they will vote for you. So a lot of the effort was just getting, which is interesting, because when you're trying to get people engaged and enthusiastic about a candidate or about a product for that matter, it's not necessarily just, it's harder to change their minds. It's much easier to just mobilize them. So if they're already like a particular candidate, or it's easier to get them just to go and vote than it is to persuade them to sort of change their mind about the candidate. So the bulk of the effort we spent is getting people to vote, which is a huge difference.
One of the key things that I keep reading was, and I think it's the marketing dream, was instead of having segments, you get down to the individual, a customised message mm-hmm. to the individual. Mm-hmm. How did they? I mean, you've got a massive IT project on one hand, you've got all these people in the field, a lot of different messages needing to go out there. I mean, can you describe how that worked?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a lot of hype around the one-to-one, and it wasn't the messaging that was one-to-one. It was, so we scaled using people, which is very rare today. You scale using computers, you don't scale using people, and our scaling was we had 2-point-something million volunteers, so we didn't have to do a message necessarily that was customized for each person. We learned that if we can get somebody who's really excited about us, if we can point them to the right person, they will take care of the messaging. We don't have to tell them what to tell that, because that person is their neighbor, it's their friend, it's their somebody in their family. So all we have to do is tell them, here are 50 people you should talk to, and get them. Now we didn't really customize the messaging for each individual target. So what we did do was we took every individual voter in the country and came up with 3 scores for them, 3 propensity scores. Right? One was their propensity to support Obama. Second one was propensity to be persuaded to support Obama. And the third one was their propensity to vote. It doesn't matter which direction. And using those 3 scores, we could decide what we're doing with each person. Right? So if you imagine sort of the classic 2x2 grid, now if you think of people as very likely to support Obama and not likely to vote, then those people, you don't try to change their mind, you just get them to vote. Very likely so not likely to support Obama and likely to vote, you really don't do anything with them because it's too expensive to change their mind. You try to find the small sliver who are persuadable and try to change their mind, and sort of the whole set. If you take the other one, would be very likely to vote for Obama and very likely to vote. And those are people you don't want to tell them anything to do with voting or supporting Obama. They're excited, happy, engaged. They're going to do what they're going to do. You get them to be advocates for you and volunteer and donate money and get their friends and family and neighbors to do something. And then you have sort of people who are not likely to vote and not likely to support Obama. You just let them go. It's just that's 25% of the population, and you can't spend time. You don't have enough resources. So we did everything at an individual level, but then the messaging was more global. But we let the individuals who we would give give a list of people to go to these doors and knock on these doors and talk to them, and that's kind of how we scaled.
Did you get Coke or one of those companies trying to piggyback on this campaign?
Yeah.
Just joking. So in terms of the actual messaging and some of the channels, there was an interesting story that I heard with regard to the frequency of email, and an interesting anecdote there. Do you want to share that with the group in terms of the volume of email and the result?
Yeah, that was depressing and funny. When I first started working there, I started getting complaints from a lot of my friends, like, stop sending me emails, you guys are sending me too many emails. And in the beginning I would just apologize and say, I'm sorry, I know it's starting to, I'm working on it, we just started. And so slowly I convinced people that let's start an experiment where we reduce the email we send, because we might be losing people, they're unsubscribing, they're getting less engaged. When we need them later on, they won't be around. And so we ran an experiment with a couple of million people where we sent some people half the emails we were sending and some people 0 for a period of time. And our hypothesis was that when you decrease this frequency, they start getting sort of more aware of when an email comes. And so when you bring them back up to normal later, they will make up for the lost money in the middle and then start giving more. Turns out we lost money in that experiment. People didn't give money during the experiment, but also didn't do anything afterwards. So then there's this painful moment where we're okay. If reducing the frequency hurts us, we have to increase the frequency. So we ran an experiment where we started sending more emails. Where we went with, average we probably sent about a typical person would get 3 to 4 emails, 3 emails a week, or about somewhere around 15 to 20 a month. And that's a lot. So we started, okay, the setup of the experiment was, let's send that, and then we'll send at least 1 a day to some people, and then double what we were going to send otherwise. And so there was a lot of pushback from the people who are writing the emails. 1, we don't have time to write these emails. 2, this is really crazy. And my response was, well, we didn't magically know the right, so you were here, we reduced and it hurt. This is not a magic number, we need to go this way. So we pushed that way, and we started, turns out we were making a lot more money. For every single additional email we sent, we were making about a 15% more money on a given day, and if you're raising $1 billion, 15% could be a huge number. And even accounting for all sorts of acquisition cost and unsubscribe rates and lifetime value, we were making a few $100s for each incremental unsubscribe, which was 5-6x greater than our acquisition costs. So it made complete sense to just bombard people with emails. Now, lifetime value for us, it was a very different number than you guys care about. You know, we don't really care about their life. We care about election day. But it turned out we never found sort of we never got to the plateau. Right? Any experiment we did, it just kind of kept going up and up. So we never found the point where it was
persistence.
Yeah, I think my hypothesis is, as long as every time they open their mailbox, there is an email sitting in front of them within the first something, then that's ideal. And you know, you can try to be nice to them, but so after that, my friends would complain. Yeah, when my friends used to complain, I would apologize, and then I started sort of turning around and said, well, I'm not apologizing anymore. It's your fault. If you stop clicking on them and giving us money, we'll stop sending these emails to you. So you're asking for it, and you can control it. And
Viagra has the same challenge.
Exactly. Any spammer has the same challenge. If you just stop, I mean, all of you are, you know, spammers in some way, right? And if people just stop clicking on those emails, you know, smart systems will stop doing it.
So in terms of, there's a lot of discussion around the use of social media as well, and I was interested to hear your views with social media. I think you had if you look, you can look at it in terms of two directions: the information you can gather or the information you can communicate outwards. And you had some interesting points on both sides of those. I was wondering if you could sort of share those with the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a danger in social media right now is a lot of people assume that is the entire world, and that whatever you do on social media reflects reality, and there's no evidence that that's true. When we were running the campaign, we had a lot of vendors, all these social media listening vendors that I'm sure you're all familiar with, you know, sending us emails and calling us about, oh, we can, you know, we have this, and we can do this for you, we can do that for you, and all those were completely useless, because, you know, most of the voting population is not on Twitter, it's not on Facebook, especially the people you want to target. So one of the, you know, social media is fairly anonymous. Twitter more so than Facebook, but even Facebook is fairly anonymous for any practical. You know, I was talking to you yesterday where if you have a Facebook page and people like you, those likes are completely useless. You don't even have a list of names of people who like you. So I think the danger in social media is you overreact to it without calibrating it in some way. Right? You would never have done that in the old world where you're doing surveys. Be very careful, and I'm going to pick my sample, and you would hire somebody who would, you know, do your selection and try to figure out the right. And in social media, you just kind of like, whatever, you know, 88% of people think this is great. I'm going to just go with it without looking at, you know, who these people are. Are they customers already? Are they, you know, do they you know, purchase things from a competitor? How do they compare to the rest of my demographic? Am I targeting them in any other way? So we very much ignored input data coming in from social media, all the listening stuff. We looked at it. It was more of just keep watching it in case something goes crazy, but let's not do anything about it because that's not our target. We use social media much more as an advocacy tool, so more social networks. So Twitter we mostly ignored, did some stuff. Facebook we really used to figure out how to reach people that we couldn't reach otherwise through other marketing channels, so direct mail and email and live TV and knocking on doors, and which is basically younger people. We were missing our engagement. Younger people was really low. We didn't have contact information from them. So what we did was we used social networks to take our supporters who cared about us and ask them to let us access their their Facebook network, and then use that network to figure out who do we need to reach, and found the best person to talk to them. So we would take somebody who would come to us, would ask them for Facebook authorization to access their friend list, take that friend list and match it to our list of voters to figure out the propensity of voting and of supporting us and of being persuaded, and say, these are the 12 people who you need to target. and we would then ask them, these are the 12 people who we think you can influence and who are useful for this purpose. Can you share this message with them? And that was extremely successful because we were able to really reach these people that we had no other way of getting to. And the volunteers who were the ones who were doing this work, they wanted to help. They just didn't have if we gave them their entire friend list of 600, 800 people and said, can you message the people who you think might need to hear from us, that people would just cancel and they wouldn't convert. Whereas doing that, our sharing rate was ridiculously high, and also the conversion back from their friends was order of around 10%, which was much, much, much higher than any other way of reaching people individually through those networks. So we were really much more effective at using social networks as an advocacy channel than the listening tool.
Which I find really interesting because I think there's a lot of emphasis on the opposite.
Absolutely, because it's very easy to do. Anybody can build a product that takes tweets in and gives you random graphs. They're not random, but there's nothing you can do with them. You've got sentiment and you've got buzz and volume, and there'll be a word cloud somewhere that it looks pretty, and it's a dashboard, so somebody can look at it and see what they're paying for. But because you need to justify what you just bought, right? And there are 100 vendors, they're all the same, they don't do anything interesting. And we've looked at all of them, and we decided it wasn't worth wasting our time. We needed to be more actionable, and none of those things couldn't really take any action. So that was exactly, I think it's too easy to fall into that trap, and we spend a lot of time convincing people that that's not a good way to go, even internally.
One of the keys to success that I see in the campaign that you did was how you connected those systems to the messaging and the volunteer pool that you had. It was just managing that scale, but a lot of companies have difficulty in connecting the systems to the people and to the business outcome that they're trying to achieve. How did you solve that in such a relatively short period of time, and with such an enormous, 2.5 million volunteers?
Yeah.
How did you solve that challenge?
Well, we didn't really solve it. I think we had a workaround because we weren't looking for long-term. We weren't looking for a system that could run for the next 5 years or 10 years. We needed it just to work for that particular time. We just used lots of shortcuts. So instead of building this massive, integrated data warehouse with all these different things in there, what we did was we said, well, we're going to have these vendors running their own systems, and the teams inside the campaign will be using these vendor systems. So instead of trying to get them to switch to a new system and build new interfaces and build everything scratch, we'll let them use that. But we'll build a system that would grab everything from those things, put it into our central data warehouse ourselves, do all the analysis there, and then push the data back out to the systems. So we didn't want to touch anything that was going there because that would require training and getting people to learn new things and us building all this, the front end and everything. So what we would do is we would basically synchronize with all the databases, and then, for example, every night we would have a system where people would they would use the system to pull a list of. So they would say, I have a volunteer, I have 10 volunteers in my office coming tomorrow. I need a list of 600 people to call. And they would go into the system and just say 600, and it would give them a list. So what we would do every night is update our models, and then score everybody in the voting population, and then take the scores and then push them back out into the system. So they didn't really need to know what was happening in the back, how this, what is it in their system, is it outside their system? They just had to pull a list, and it was there. Same for email. When the email team would send an email, they would say, I need to send this email to 1 million people, and it's this kind of email. And they would just press the button, and all the stuff would happen in our sort of analytics system, but then pushed out to the email vendor that they were using. So I think the key was sort of integrating into the processes they would use, to integrating into the tools that they were using anyway, instead of trying to switch them. It wasn't efficient. I mean, I would have not have done that if it was if I had 5 years, but given a year, that was the most efficient way of it was a hack, but it was the most efficient way for us to get something done.
We are going to open questions up around the table. in a short while. But I haven't asked you the obvious question, and I'm not going to, which is, we've got an election here that's coming up.
In Australia?
Yeah, you might be aware of that, but I think some people are wondering if you're involved in that, but I'm not going to ask you that. In terms of the outcome, so describe the team's emotion when the election was run. The campaign had been finished and the result was out. How did that feel for you personally and for the team?
Yeah, I think we all just wanted to go to sleep. That was the first thing. I'm going to go home and sleep, because we had this election night party that was supposed to be, and we all went there. The way it worked was that Romney, who's the other guy, had to concede for Obama to be able to say, we won, and we couldn't go home until that happened. And so we just kept waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And we're all tired and sleepy, and none of us, no one want to go to a party of any sort. Just want to go home and sleep. So finally, when it was over, and the person, I just want to go home and sleep. But then the next day was fun, because after that, we sort of slept in and came back to the office, and Obama was sort of just around, hanging out in the office, and that was fun. So.
Did he thank you and the team?
Yeah, I think he it's one of those things where he wasn't very much involved in the campaign day to day, just because he had other things to do. Unlike the previous campaign, where that was his primary role, this time was really, and one of the reasons why the campaign ran from Chicago and not D.C. It was the first time in the U.S. when an incumbent president ran a campaign not from D.C. Because it was, it had to be done sort of away from the typical day-to-day political thing. So that was actually good in hindsight, but it was good. It was a stressful but rewarding year and a half.
Yeah, and the job offers started flowing in. Were you getting spammed?
Yeah, I think people sort of believe the hype around, this must have, data was the cause Obama won. No, that wasn't the cause Obama won. Obama was the cause Obama won. Our volunteers were the reason. We, as I said, we scaled using humans, right? So if we didn't have those 2 million volunteers, there was no way we could have won. If we switched candidates, there was no way we could have won with whatever we could do with our technology and data.
There's a bunch of interesting ethical questions as well, and I know you've already been asked some of them around, how does this relate to democracy and so forth. We don't have a huge amount of time, but do you want to give us your view on that? Is this unethical, using all this sort of computing power to manipulate the minds of these weak individuals? I think there's a
well, that's what you guys all do, right? So you guys are all doing unethical things, and no, I think, the majority of the work we did was really, you can call, I think, whatever word you use, manipulation, persuasion, influence, convince. We all do that every day with people we know around different issues. We try to convince people to do things that we think we agree with, and we want to convince our friends and neighbors and family to do that. I think what we were able to do was, it's very hard to get people to do what they really don't want to do. Right? 46% of people don't vote. We couldn't get them to vote, whatever we did, right? So I think it's less, most of the work we did was really give them information, because that's all you can really do. You can't drag them over and get them to vote. It's still a physical act, and it's not a click the like button, and it's much easier to do. So I think there are ethical issues if you use if you change your messages. If you say, I'm going to tell you this and I'll tell you something conflicting. That absolutely is, especially if one of them is not true. And I don't think there are ethical issues in getting more people to vote. I think the more people vote, the better it is for democracy. I think there's no ethical issue in giving them information that's more relevant to them. You all do that. If you've got a 60-year-old grandmother versus an 18-year-old high school student, you're not going to tell them the same thing. It doesn't make any sense, because they're not interested in the same things. So maybe it's just how I justify it, but I actually think that that the more what these data helps us do is really it helps us personalize at a scale that eventually causes more people to be aware of what's going on, and I think you can use that to really make them more part of the process. Which over here, it's different, right? What's strange over here is most people vote, but there is no culture of sort of campaigning and volunteering and sort of canvassing, whereas in the U.S., half the people vote, but again, you've got millions of people who donate money and who volunteer and who go door to door, and so there's sort of this engagement at different levels, and I think with data you can sort of really increase that level of engagement.
So the last thing for me, congratulations on the result, obviously. But I think now you've on that ethical sort of side, you're actually trying to use data for sort of social problems and so forth, and working at the university. Mm-hmm. Do you want to give us a quick rundown of what that is, and then we'll open it up to the floor and take questions.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so I kind of went back to where I was before joining the campaign. I want to use what I know how to do to sort of make some sort of a social impact. And what I started after the campaign was over, lots of people wanted me to work for them, and I just wasn't motivated to go work for Kellogg and sell more cereal. Like, it's just not going to happen. So I kind of decided to. Also, one of the things that happened is I was talking to a lot of students at different times, and they were all surprised by how their skills could actually be used to do something useful as opposed to selling more ads or going to Google or Facebook or something like that people like me end up doing. So I started a summer program where I have about 40 graduate students from around the country in computer science and statistics and data, and they're spending summer working on projects with nonprofits and governments around education and healthcare, energy and transportation and public safety. And that's sort of a starting point for creating a group that's really focused on using data to basically do the kind of things we did in the campaign around predicting who might be at risk of dropping out of high school and not going to college or going to a worse college and not graduating. And so sort of prediction propensity models, and then designing interventions that could help change that behavior. When do you intervene? Who intervenes? How often? What's the message? So basically marketing, but marketing for social problems where we can hopefully change these things. It's not a sort of a short-term fix, but those are the kinds of things we're right now I'm working on, and it's been fun. It's been busy, but really fun because a lot of students from the program, at least in summer, they're sort of changing their mind about what they want to do next. They had job offers that they're now saying no to, so that's happy.
So thank you again. Thanks for your time. I'll open it up to the floor for people who have questions. I could quiz him for 24 hours intense interrogation, but I'll open it up to the floor.
We had some time in the beginning, but it was really an ongoing process to convince people. There were certain groups that were harder to convince than others. They had been doing things the same way for many years. They didn't really know why they should change. And so I think we did it in two ways. One was we would run head-to-head experiments. And so we did a lot of experiments where we would say, okay, you want to do it this way? Let's do it this way. And let's also do it this way. Let's split and then see what happens. And the second one was that we weren't. What often happens in different organizations is so these data geeks who are sitting in a corner and they know nothing about the business. And they're really smart people, and they're sort of treated as these special people who need to be left alone to produce these insights. And I think that's just ridiculous that you can't produce insights if you don't know what you're doing, what the business does. So same way, a lot of us who came from the outside political world had to learn what politics is. What does election data mean, and what does it look like, and what are the business problems really? So we embedded our teams into, we spent a lot of time just learning and talking, and that gave us the credibility to then go and say, this is the way, here's something, speaking the usual stuff that's obvious, but really helps where you're speaking their language, you're not speaking the data language. You are giving them answers to their problems, not random insights. It's still, I still get, I still get asked these questions. So, what was the most interesting you discovered? Like, well, we weren't sitting there discovering things. We were trying to operationalize this massive machine so that we can win the election. I couldn't care less about getting any, like, oh, I found this really interesting thing. When people vote this way, here's what they end up doing. Like, I don't really care about that. So I think that was the key is one, embedding the analytics people into the business so that they know what the business problems are. They can, including myself, I had no idea about politics before. And then really doing it empirically, so running experiments and comparing with here's the list you were going to send to, here's the list we came up with, and here's the ROI, and obviously this is better. The data question is interesting. We didn't have as much data as people think we did. So our core, there is what's called in the US called the voter file. It's basically a database of all the voters, and it has basic demographics: name, address, phone number, gender, ethnicity, date of birth in certain cases, and in some cases what party you have registered. And not everybody does that. And that was bulk of the data. We didn't get any sort of consumer behavior appended because it wasn't very useful for predicting the kind of things we wanted to predict. So one more thing, was voting history. So it's public data, and for every voter, it tells you, what elections they voted in the past. You don't know which direction, but you know which. And then after that, every other data, everything else we had was what we collected through our interactions with the voters. So if they gave us money, if they volunteered for us, when we called them to try to persuade them to vote for us, they said, yeah, I'm already voting, or I'm not going to vote, or anything else. And so that was the data we had, which wasn't very much. It was in the few terabytes. So nothing big, could fit on any laptop really. I mean, if every business was rational, we wouldn't be here, right? Or if every consumer was rational, we wouldn't be here either. So people are not rational, and there are short-term objectives that they're optimizing. So the way campaigns work in the U.S. is you get a lot of money for a presidential election, and then the money goes away right afterwards. So we built a lot of things. At this point, nobody knows how to run those things because the people who built those things are gone. And next time around, they're going to have to start again. So it's purely money. You don't have money for a sustained period of time. So you sort of have these cycles. And it's actually every 2 years, not every 4. So there are these midterm elections. And people will reuse some of it, but rebuild a lot. And then that'll go away, and then they'll start again. And that's just the way it is. It's life. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but. We did build on top of what people built earlier, but it just was a much bigger scale this time, and then it'll be done again next time. We had every voter, and they were tagged with what they were targets for: registering to vote, being persuaded, getting them to vote, fundraising, volunteering. So they were on a list of different kinds of targets. And when a conversation would happen, the person having that interaction would record what happened. So whether and some of them were electronic interactions. So we would have this online calling tool. So they would call, and then there would be the form right there which says nobody picked up, got voicemail, talked to them, and then what was the outcome. And if it was, sometimes it was sort of face-to-face and on paper, they would take the same checkboxes on paper and then come back to the office, and it would get put into the computer every night and uploaded. So we, at any given point, we knew what percentage, within a day or so, typically we would know what percentage of our targets have been contacted or have been attempted but not contacted, and contacted successfully, or things like, oh, there was a dog in the front yard, I just didn't go inside, and that was or they spoke a different language, and then oh, this person didn't speak English. So at any given point, we could see our contact rates, our attempt rates, and see if we were, what was going on. It was a lot of manual, and we had a lot of volunteers who would do data entry in different offices. We tried to do as much electronic things as possible, but given that a lot of things were happening face to face, and there were some iPhone, iPad apps, but most of it was on paper. I think time was a year and a half is really nothing to do something like this, and I think that was our biggest challenge was we didn't have enough time, which led to sort of the next challenge of trying to figure out which things do you push on more, so which one do you want to make really sophisticated, and where good enough is good enough. So our biggest challenge was data integration. Like everybody here, I'm sure will agree that if you don't agree that you guys are doing really well in some way or another, if you don't have that data mess sitting around in 10 different databases, and that was by far our biggest challenge of how do I talk to you as a person and not a customer number in this database and a Facebook user over here and a lead over here. And the whole any sort of whatever the buzzword is for that these days is master data management, or whatever these all the record matching and customer linkage stuff. We struggle with that quite a bit because we had 50 different databases coming from, and we sort of built something that worked for us, but again, that was a very short-term solution. It wasn't a long-term solution. The other technical challenge, it was less technical, more, part technical, part cultural, that we were building our team as we were building these products at the same time. So we went from 0 to 50 in a year and a half, or in a year really, because we didn't hire that much in the last few months. So our choice of we could use a really sophisticated tool, but only a handful of people would know how to use it, and we wouldn't be able to hire those people. And somebody coming in would take 3 months to learn that tool. Was it better to just go with the tool they know, which is not the optimal tool, but it's good enough and they can start right away, or spend 3 months training them to do 20% better? And that's a challenge that most companies don't face for long-term goals, where 3 months training, not a big deal. You could do that. You could invest in that if they stay with you long enough. But there, 3 months is there are 7 months left to the election. If they learn this tool and they're 20% more effective, it's the net present value of that thing. What they do is not worth it.
So you hire someone and they take them away, like you.
We often use tools that were it may not be the best tools to use for that task, but they could start right away. So we're really focused on just we use a lot of open source tools. We use very few commercial tools. One, because it was expensive. Two, because they take months. So for example, people ask me about, did you guys use SaaS? Right? No, because it would have taken 4 months to install SaaS, and we didn't have that much time to install software. We just had to use it. And it was expensive, and so we often, most of the time, end up with open source tools, or tools that we built ourselves, and then we wrote a lot of code ourselves, basically piecing things together. So we'd build these sort of intermediate things of between this system and that system and that system and that, and we had tons of these things sitting around where they were just talking between two systems, so we could integrate all these things together. No, there's a lot of things you read that are probably. So I think that one was. I think that we would just run. When you do simulation, you run multiple times and then you get a distribution. So that's what that was. So I think people hear something and then they exaggerate from there. But we weren't doing anything computationally that crazy. It was fairly reasonable. Well, there aren't that many SaaS of the world, right? I mean, if you're talking about SaaS, there's only one SaaS. I don't think there can ever be another SaaS. And they're good for certain things. I mean, if you're doing fairly standard things where you've got your system set up and you have a particular task, and you have people who know how to run it and manage it and maintain it, then you're fine. So I think it gives you, it's a safe choice. But if you want to do anything really sort of new and sophisticated, then a tool like that won't allow you to do that. So it's a trade-off of, do you want to go out and try something new? And it may be that you sort of have, you hedge your bets, right? So your mainstream is SaaS or some fairly standard vendor, which will give you 90% of your, and then of what you do, and then you have a smaller team trying out different things where it doesn't matter if it's implementable in SaaS. It doesn't matter how you do it. Just keep trying things out. When you find something that works, then you think about the challenge is that then this team gets frustrated because you'll say, oh well, that's great, but I can't implement it in SaaS, and that team gets frustrated and probably will leave because none of their work is being used. So I think there is sort of this tension of, it's easy to have that R&D team which is trying things out, and I've been part of those teams, but they also like their work to be used, and SaaS, SPSS, all of those are they're all the same. There's not much distinction between them. They have certain things they do it reasonably well. You don't have to hire smart people. You can rely on them.
So a huge thank you, Rayid. That's a very open and honest and frank discussion about what was really a mind-blowing campaign. It's really interesting that you've kind of used data to mobilise the volunteers, but what it's come down to is that you've used the data to actually get that one-to-one interaction, true one-to-one interaction that will get that influence to change people's behaviour. I also like what you said about social media, and to your point, there's so much talk about social media being a listening tool, but actually using it for advocacy and using the data from social media to have that one-to-one conversation is phenomenal. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that over the next couple of days. Please don't follow the path of email. Let's not start spamming it. But it is interesting. It challenges what we think about email. That if we send all these emails, that people aren't going to respond to it, and even that in itself is an insight. That's not necessarily going to take away. But it we do have to challenge what we think we know about marketing. It's not always straightforward. And I also like it that some of the challenges that you faced in a short campaign are the same challenges that we're all facing around the table here today. So a big thank you to you, and a big thank you to C3 as well for partnering with us today.